So as Mel's letting everyone in, I just want to tell everyone some small housekeeping. If you have any other questions, please put them in the chat. Frederick, we have had such an onpouring of questions for you that we're going to basically do this as like a Q&A because there's so many questions and we want to be super conscious of your time. So
I love it. Perfect.
Great. There's so many. We have fashion students, we have educators, we have industry professionals here tonight. And it seems that everybody is just interested in your career trajectory, where you've been, how you got there, how do you stay on top for the last 5 years doing CFDA fashion shows in New York Fashion Week. Yeah, so I want to show everybody the video that you provided. Did you make this video?
Yeah, so I'll give a little background. The video I actually did because of this year I'm nominated for Rising Star for Best Designer for Women's Wear for Fashion Group International. So that's kind of an intro that I had to do for them that they're sending to the judges. So I thought it kind of, and then when I finished, I thought, oh, it kind of at least gives an overview of my, you know, the 5 years, kind of like, you know, how I started and for the 5-year plan, not pre that, but at least they'll understand the Frederick Anderson collection, what is the present entity of that I live in, you know, so.
Excellent. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share it, and I want to play it first, and then we'll give you our onslaught of questions, basically.
Perfect, love it.
Black like me. Is black a color? No. Black is all colors. Can a color define a race? If black is my race, but it's not a color, should I then be defined by all colors impacting my particular black hue? Or is everyone simply black like me?
Right.
Amazing.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So for those that were late coming in, without further ado, the acclaimed Frederick Anderson, designer extraordinaire. We're so happy. I'm trying not to fan out. I was really excited for you to be here. And I
So good. I'm really thrilled to be here.
Really, thank you so much. It's, you know, I don't know if you know a little bit about NYSD, but we are a short-term trade school. So we give you everything from 4 to 2 year fashion programs in a solid 1 year. And we have a lot of international students, a global studentship, and a lot of them are here and some of them participated and got the experience of being with you for New York Fashion Week. So for you to come in and give us the industry perspective so that they could really learn beyond the 4 walls of the classroom is amazing. And we're super appreciative. Thank you so much.
No, I love it. I think it's part of the experience. It's funny. I have a great intern who's become my assistant who just left, Cole, for me, it was the process that I went through, and it's the process I think everyone needs to go through, the mentorship, the understanding of the industry through someone who actually is living it, because it is different from the classroom. The classroom gives you applied knowledge, and then the application in real life is really the biggest hurdle. And the thing that a lot of people don't actually end up succumbing because of that's the biggest hurdle, you know, is like actually applying it. So. Exactly.
And we got to apply it this year with you, but that video that we just saw, that was your last 5 years of New York Fashion Week experience.
Yeah, so you know, it's funny. So it's been an evolution for me. So I've been in the industry for 20 years. So I was the partner of Douglas Hannah, a couture collection, and we still have a fragrance out there. Very successful collection, very niche, very, very high end and extremely couture. Really much more specific and ladylike than probably I ever was. But as a partnership, you know, when I came out of FIT, my lover at the time, Douglas Hannah, and the two of us launched it together. It was originally Frederick Anderson Hannah, and then it turned into Douglas Hannah, and it kind of grew and it kind of blossomed, but it was always something that wasn't necessarily my vision, but it was a great vision, you know. And then as I you know, kind of spent more time in the industry, and as he started going off this way and I started going off that way, I started realizing that maybe it's time for me to like celebrate where I am and what I have to say, which is what was the evolution of Black Like Me. Black Like Me, to me, the launch of my collection was me experiencing Frederick at a true vision of who I am. Meaning, like I talk a lot, that's my voiceover in the video. And I talked about color because I do play with color. If you haven't noticed, within my collection, I do like color combinations, and I love the idea of color in the way that it speaks to us, and the use of color in the language as opposed to using color only as a ornamentation, if that makes sense to you. So a lot of times I use color for like to say something hard. You know, like when I say red, you know, I like to play against it sometimes. This time I really wanted to do red in a sexy way, but usually what I'll do is take red and pull back from it because I like to play with that dialogue and that language where we think red is always about sex. But so I like to deal with that in the way that I've manifested after, you know, what is now 20 years since I left, you know, college and started working in the industry. So, so the first collection, Black Like Me, was like really a thesis for me, if you want to do it that way. It was kind of like me taking the knowledge that I have and where I am now and the experience at the time. We were, you know, for me, it was an experience I had come out of a collection that was way too ladylike, way too specifically a demographic that was very expensive and very privileged. And I really wanted to break that down. So Black Like Me was me getting back to my roots and figuring out who I am. Obviously, the first thing we do is look at ourselves. So that's why I started analyzing my own color and talking about the layers of Blackness, because that also talks about the environment that we live in. And at the time, as irony of it, it was the year before we started going into COVID and we started going into all of this kind of where we really started delving into this kind of race identification and how we identify ourselves and the layers of race. And it was funny because I always think that we have zeitgeists that happen in the world. And I think I was kind of plugged into that because it was something I had been thinking about because of, you know, the early 2000s when I first got into fashion. up until 2010 or 12, it was very much ornamentation. And it was very much not about the woman, but about like this kind of like, you know, very overly ladylike, very ornamented suits. And, you know, it was the time of looking rich, you know. And then like, I think that what happened after what was the recession in 2008, 2009, we started thinking about like the idea that like the garishness of being overtly rich was no longer sexy. And then what does it look like to look like expensive, but have it feel like you? So for me, Black Like Me was tearing that down, coming back to myself, pulling up layers of ideas that I hadn't talked about, which was my own race, and the way that I felt in this industry, and in this point when I like am coming out of a collection where, you know, it was a dual idea to something that was purely me. So I think I exercised all that in a capsule, and then it evolved over the next 3 years to where it was when I had a full collection, which was 2 years ago, with my spring collection, when I finally came to like a 30, 40 piece collection. This collection, when I call it Full Bloom, was because it is the biggest collection I've done. It actually is a full expanse of a full idea. And, you know, because of part of the thing that I think is important for everyone that I learned early on and I've taken with me, don't rush it. Take your time. So my first collection was a capsule. It dealt with tweeds, it dealt with leather, it dealt with lace. Those were the first instruments that I wanted to play in, the first techniques that I loved, and I wanted to play and try to figure out what my personal vision was. So, and then from that, I layered on chiffons. I layered on, like each season, I'd bring in a new texture as I expanded what the vision was, so that the vision never left my story, but I built upon that vision. And then so in Full Bloom, to me, my 5-year was like, it's a full blossoming collection. It has all the textures and layers. It has the crochets that I've added in. It has the leathers and laces that I started off with. But then on top of that, I've added in all these new textures of chiffons and beading and these, you know, jacquards that play, you know, because I love texture. I like the idea of texture and color and how they play against each other. So to me, it's important that when you add a new idea in, that it plays within that story. So the milieu of all of that together becomes a story that creates, so when you see it coming down the runway, it hits your senses in several different ways. Not just the color, but the texture. You start looking at the detail of the lace, and you see how the crochet and the lace kind of have the same idea going on. And you have to look closely to see that, you know, because I play with the stitches to make sure that, like with this time, the rose technique that I used that was used in the guipure lace was also transferred to the crochet, you know, and taking those techniques, so it built upon that story. So to me, you know, In Full Bloom was like me taking the initiative of like the initial spark of what my idea, and seeing it come to an idea that like I think is what Frederick Anderson has become and what I will be moving forward with, you know. So to me, I'm excited, you know, to have, after COVID, because COVID was a big dent and we couldn't produce that much, to come out of it, you know, with a full collection, to me was like a real blossoming and a real blossom and a full bloom of an idea and a feeling of kind of feeling euphoric about the idea that fashion can continue and still bring beauty and intellectual ideas and not just be stuff.
Absolutely. You can see your textural experimentation throughout your line and your love for color, like the vibrancy. So you feel this year was your 5-year plan. It culminated.
5 years in the idea of the beginning of the Frederick Anderson idea. At the beginning, I called it a collection by Frederick Anderson because I wasn't even sure what it was going to be. And then evolved from a collection by Frederick Anderson to Frederick Anderson collection. And now it's just Frederick Anderson, because now I think of it as just me. So now it's no longer a collection of ideas. It's really just me. I feel like it's evolved to a real thought, you know. And what what I keep going back to, which I will give out, I think is the best piece of wisdom, is don't push yourself. Let yourself go through those processes. It's healthy to go through those processes in order to train your brain to work in a methodical way. You can't jump in and say, oh, I love chiffons this season and do a collection in chiffons, because if you've left behind everything that you've built before. Each time you have to take a technique and move it forward. And also in the tradition of clothing, I do believe you have to be known for something. you kind of have to have an idea. You can't jump into this without having a solid idea of who you are and what you want to accomplish. So when I say accomplish, for me, I love working with tweeds and laces. That's where it started. From that, I fell in love with crochet. So I did research and started coming up with all these crazy stitches and stuff. I found this great experimental factory in Argentina, and I literally send them screenshots at 4 a.m, like of something I found from the 50s and say, can you do this? And they're like, I don't know. And then they'll send it to some like artisan who will send me back a swatch, and it's a process. And then I'll say, oh, that'll be cool with the little balls that we started last season. And then I layer the balls on top of that crochet. And then if you look at like one of the, like the black dress, you see all that evolution. Starts with the florals from this season at the top. In the middle is the little jacquard, little like crisscross that was the waist seam that came from last season. And then I built upon that at the bottom. So it's like a story for me. So like for my client who grows with me, she goes on this adventure with me. And I think that's why people, like my clients, I mean, Saks is selling like crazy, which I love. And it's because the clients keep coming back because they're like, oh my God, I saw something new and cool. And they build upon the story. And I think that I want them to go on that adventure with me.
Exactly. And you can see that. And I think that that's what we talk about in class all the time, to really create that story and understand your target market. And I think it's interesting that you're not, right? So your target market, you would be able to describe better than I would, but it's interesting that finally we don't see someone who's just targeting millennials. For you, why did you?
My clothing's not cheap. It's got, I mean, my clients are, you know, I have a lot of millennials who buy it, and usually, but it's for like bar mitzvahs or for they're going to a wedding or something like that. But really it's a 30, 40-year-old girl. I know that's the girl. I know who's buying it, and I know why she has it. I mean, and I like a little bit below that, and I like a little bit above that, because of obviously I want to have everyone feel they can see themselves within some portion of my collection, because my vision should be inclusive, not exclusive. It's like there's pieces in there that I think that a 20-year-old can wear, and there's a piece in there that a 50-something-year-old woman can wear, and everyone in between, I think that's fantastic. If I can have the mom and the daughter together come in and shop, which I have a lot at Jimmy's here in New York, it's fantastic. I love it. And the daughter's like, oh, I saw this cool little chiffon, and the mom's like, oh, that tweed little jacket I can imagine myself with a pair of jeans. She can't wear the whole look, obviously. She's not going sheer, but she can do something, she can take a piece, make it her own, which is she wants to be in the story that I've written, and I give her ways to get in. So that's an important thing, is when you're designing, think of how everyone can get in. Not that it's you have to be specific, but you have to be open enough so people can imagine themselves in. If you're only dressing one woman, you don't have a business. People have to be able to get into your collection. And so I think that's really important. And it's a conversation I have with my sales team, is always like, they'll tell me, well, this whole tweed group brought in a new client. And I'm like, oh, really? And they're like, oh, you brought this new client in that that you hadn't had before. And I'm like, well, who is she? And where does she go? And like, what is she wearing it for? So that I understand it and I don't lose her the next season. If she came in and she's excited, I now want to build her into my story so that the next season, she finds one or two pieces. She's never going to find herself completely in the story, because the vision is me, but I want everyone to be able to see themselves within me, on the story that I'm telling.
Right. So how do you tie in media and network to push your brand? Is it all about New York Fashion Weeks? So every collection that you're making, all of your story is culminating every time at your fashion show? Or how does that work?
New York Fashion Week is fantastic. It's a great platform to speak. There's a lot of players in New York Fashion Week, and it's a political game that it's a maze that you work through. I've been very lucky from the beginning. They've embraced me. And I think because of my messages were strong, they wanted it as part of their messaging. So I've been very lucky. I don't take that for granted. But by the same token, young designers, you don't have to go that route. You can make your noise and write your stories yourself. The wonderful moment that we're in, and I took advantage of it during COVID, was video and these kind of moments that you can create that are real moments that are tactile and people can experience themselves through. actually resonate and people join in. But you have to be careful with those moments that you don't go off whatever your branding is. Some of the mistakes that I saw during like this whole COVID thing, where I've had friends that were designers who all of a sudden decided they were going to do like they're uptown, and all of a sudden they did hippie chic and went to like some strange place and whatever. And then all of a sudden their client lost commitment to them, and they were going off brand just to make a story that like basically was so strong that it told their client they're no longer interested in them. So I think that, you know, the idea of New York Fashion Week, which is great, is for brands like myself that are going global. I'm selling in Europe, I'm selling in Dubai, I'm selling in, you know, I'm going to Paris next week. So the idea of the brand's a more global brand, but that's because I've been in the business a lot longer. It's not just this incarnation. Do you know what I mean? So there's a history. But if you're starting from the beginning, don't look at New York Fashion Week as your judging point. You know, it is not necessarily the beginning and end all. It's a great vehicle, but there's many people who like launch at New York Fashion Week and they disappear because of they were launching at the wrong time, with not the wrong product, with not the right product, and with bad messaging, and they disappear very quickly. So I always believe, like what I did, I started with a capsule. I didn't do New York Fashion Week for 3 years. It was a capsule first. Second year, I did like a little installation uptown, uptown at a little small townhouse. I did an installation that was kind of like built on another story. And I built the story slowly so people could get into the story before I did a big idea. So I just think that's more important than trying to run and chase the magic ring. The ring will come because of work. It's not going to come because...
Your capsule was 16 pieces, that first capsule that you did?
That capsule was 16 pieces, yeah. And
so when you found the Argentinian knit place that you're using, how would you...
A designer friend of mine who's from Brazil, who was in Argentina, who came up and did a collection here. He was a fan of mine online. This is Instagram and social media has changed everything. He was a fan of mine online. He's a designer from Argentina. He was trying to get into the US market. I introduced it to some people. And then I hadn't seen what he really did because I only saw images which were not amazing, but they were interesting images online. So I was interested to see the collection. So he did a small presentation. I went to the presentation. And even though it was specific for the Argentinian and Brazilian market, a lot of fringe, but on the top of it were these little tiny crochet pieces. And I said, I can't believe those crochet pieces. He said, well, that's not what I do. I said, yeah, but I want the crochet. So his factory has become my partnership. So we've become good friends. And this is, we've become good friends, and I work with his team and we work together, and I can sit down and go through like specifics of what I'm thinking. And then I feel like I have a footprint of people down on the ground with me in Argentina who can help me achieve. So it's once again, it's a collaborative effort. It's like, we're living in what is the future already, and we have to be cognizant of what our abilities are. I mean, we can create so much now that we couldn't have created before because of what we're doing right now, because of being able to get on a call and communicate with people in all parts of the world. And so like I have a really good friend of mine, Mariama Camara, who's her father's the governor of a small village in outside of Africa. And I'm going there to create like these hand-dyed like fabrics, because she's been trying to get me there forever. And she did a project with another designer friend of mine. She said, Frederick, but you should be here. And I said, I know, I just have to find time. And I love that, and once again, it's a collaborative process created through these kinds of situations where we talk about ideas together. And then I'm like, you know what, this is what I'm thinking. I do sketches and I bring it forward, so I think that the world has changed, and thusly, or if I was launching at 20 years old now, I would take full opportunity of that. And I would use that as my platform and not think about like the traditional platforms. I'm not sure that New York Fashion Week is going to be the future of fashion. I think that New York fashion is what it is right now. And I think coming out of COVID especially, it was a great moment to bring designers together and show that we're still here. And I applaud them for pulling it back together, because there was questions if it was going to happen and We all had these round tables and conversations. And I'm glad we all moved forward, because if it's necessary. But we're in a global world through what's happening, naturally with what's happening online. We have to think that way. I don't think just the US. I think is the first thing in my video. I'm an American designer who exists in the world. I'm not just an American designer, because the US is not a little bubble on its own. It's not an island. We interact with, which is beautiful about it. We interact with people all over the world, and we should participate in that. It's going to make your clothing better. It'll make the story better, and it'll make your ideas more prolific. I mean, it lifts them in such a big way.
100%. That's why I think you're so relevant, because you are a global citizen. You are collaborating. You're doing the things that we're learning about now in school, and saying, hey, fashion media has changed the traditional fashion industry. Yeah. And now it's democratized it, so to speak. So you don't necessarily have to be showing in New York Fashion Week, but you could be in the peripherals, is what you're saying.
You can build a story. I mean, there's so many great brands. My friends at Kayeta that built their great brand. It's built online. It's built through Instagram and social media. They start doing shows now, but they didn't build it that way. And they're doing great. I mean, there are so many vehicles that you can build from now. But I would say learn all the tools. Like when I was in school, I didn't just do fashion. I also took photography, which I didn't know would be useful now. So like all my images, I create myself. And like I bring a team together, and I have the same hair and makeup and team and whatever, because I also visually at this point want control, because I want control of my story. But it's become, that is the most important thing, is my visuals are strong because they come from me, not because of every season I bring a new person in, which was the old way of doing it. It used to be that everyone would bring in a stylist or someone to work on their collection each season. When I first got in the business, that's the way it was done. You'd create a bunch of pieces, and then you'd have this team that would come in and they style it and put it together. And it was like, and that was because of it had to be embraced by the magazines. Now that the magazines aren't the end result, the end, trajectory of where we want to be, we're not thinking anymore that, Vogue loves me and covers me. I'm so happy. Obviously, it's for me. I'm very happy. All good. I love that. But by the same token, my images that I create are my images, and those are the ones that are resonating and moving around the world. And those are the ones that are driving other people to me. So I would say, nowadays, a designer has to be a creative director, not just pen to paper. 100%. Like I don't sketch only, I sketch, and I also have to think of what's going to be around it now. Like, what is the world that it lives in? This girl isn't just sitting on paper. We're not just making clothing. That's the old days, but there's nothing new to be made in clothing. We all know you have to put your arms in the same way and whatever. So now it's about the world in which she lives in, and the conversation around the clothing, I think, is important. And right. I think that, which is why, like, I'm very much into the idea that my everything I do looks like my hands have touched it. I cut every single piece in my collection this season, every single piece. I made almost every single pattern in the collection, and I love that. I cut all night long, and I just sit, I have a drink, and I cut, and I change, and I'd love to have a big balloon off the sleeve there. So then I just cut it, I make it. And I send it to my seamsters, because they're all working all over the city because we're still in COVID. So I'll send it over, and I send a little mini sketch saying, I don't know if this will work. Send me a picture as you're working. I came up with it last night, and then they'll send me a picture back. And that's my joy. That's what I love about it. And then, but it has the idea of like the whole idea of the creative vision of what I think it should look like at the end result. So, but you got to have that passion and love for it in order to do it,
100%. I read something the other day, and it was like, fashion used to be a monologue, right? And all of these gatekeepers, like you said, and Vogue and
totally.
But now it's a dialogue. And when you're telling your story, people really see the transparency of you being the creative director. And like you said, having your hand in everything. So
it looks like me. I love that it looks like me. Right or wrong. There are people who we're always going to have haters. I have friends who are haters, and they act like they're my friends. And I know they're haters. And I'm like, I get it. I already know. It's like, whatever. I mean, I have a friend of mine, and the two of us started designing at the same place, but she's flying off to Aspen and flying here, whatever. So her collection didn't go anywhere. She's talented, but it's not my gig to tell her that, like, dude, you need to sit at home for 5 minutes and like concentrate instead of having a bunch of interns cutting shit for you. Maybe you should spend some time trying to figure out yourself. If you can't cut, maybe you need to learn, and you need to figure out how your clothing is made so it looks like you, because now more than ever, people want to feel that it's yours. I think that's the big thing. When technology came in, we reverted back to that we don't believe anything, and now we want a real story. So it has to be real. It has to. I love my artisans. I talk to them every day. They tell me what's going on. They all got 6 of the 9 knitters I have got COVID. So I was panicked. I didn't think I was having a show. And it's just you're involved in the process. And that's where we are now. And I love the idea of that because I can talk authentically about how my clothing's made, which excites women because they put it on and there's more perceived value in it because they know that I touched it. And they know that, like, those knits were all hand knit by someone sitting in Argentina. It's not in a machine. It's not done in a fantasy world somewhere. It's not in China in like some factory, that we've never seen these people before. I think that's valid for another price point, not valid for me and my story. So I have to feel I understand where it came from. And that's me, where I am now in the industry. And I think that is the future, is understanding where it came from, how it came about, and what is the process that got you there is the new story. And everything else fades away when that isn't authentic. And I think we've seen many a brand, I don't need to tell you, you all know them, that you've seen them disappear out of the world because if they weren't authentic. And they kind of like disappeared because of you can read bullshit from a mile away. And sometimes, we know it and we feel it and we're kind of like, you put it on, you're like, oh my God, this feels like something I've already seen or had. And it's like, yes, there is a limited amount of stories out there, but it's the way you bring your vision to that story that makes it unique,
Absolutely. Your point of view. So we have like so many questions. I'm going to go and jump into them. So Justin, Chimaya, Ashmita, Shironi, Titania, and Josefina all want to better understand the inner workings of what goes into preparing your line and a runway show. And they want to have the opportunity to learn better about the skills that you're doing in your career. So if you could drop one kernel of information, what all of them had mentioned in their questions is that in your level in your career, what would you say to yourself as a young fashion designer? I think you touched on it a little bit.
Learn everything. Learn to take photography. Go and take a class on the weekend because you know how important photography is. And like have a vision of how your pieces are going to be shot. You cannot go to a photographer and say, just shoot it. And you will get something that doesn't look like you. And it happens all the time. And designers come out and they'll launch a collection and you look at it, you're like, I don't even know who that is. It's like a different designer than it was the season before because they didn't have a clear vision of how to get to where they need to go. I think now we have to be our own creative directors. I mean, like Virgil Blow was not a pen to paper designer, but he was a magnificent like orchestrator of like big vision. So if you're going to be pen to paper, you also have to have that other layer. You have to have that big vision. So you need to know how to take photography. You need to know how to download it. You need to do your Excel documents. I mean, it's so funny. My intern here the other night he's trying to launch his own collection. It was so funny. And I was sitting with him and I was teaching him how to do, because there's a new platform called New Order. And so Saks and Selfridges and Intermix all shop off of New Order. And he was like, well, what are you doing? And I was sitting there typing and all the thing. I said, well, I'm the keeper of all this knowledge. I wish I could hand it off to someone. But I'm the one that knows all the fabrications that went into the garment and whatever. So instead of handing it off someone, I'll sit and have a drink once again. I keep talking about drinks. Sorry about that. But, and I'll sit and type all the information in, but it's part of the process. Learn your process. Part of the process, even doing a show, you have to chronicle everything. You can't just stick stuff in a show. It's got to be that like there's a vision of how it works outside of the show. So it's not just I'm putting together a great look. At the end of the day, that has to work like when the store comes in to buy, if you're planning on doing a collection, It has to sell. So you have to make sure that trajectory that you created during the show is also merchandised in between when they come to your showroom, so that in between all those little X's where you have the beautiful dress that comes out, but they know that's the 20-year-olds, but then their client's 30-something years old. What is the dress that she's going to get that looks like that kind of pulls back so that she can get into your collection? So building a show isn't just the show, it's building a collection. It's that the show is not the point. The show is the crescendo of the experience to show what you're about that season. But the ultimate point is to build a collection that you can sell, or that you can tell a story if you're not to the selling point yet. Because it's not at the first couple seasons, you're not going to sell. So then it's about building what that story is. And doing a show, like I said, when I'm doing my runway, I also do all the models. I have to take all the shots front and back because I have to have that to be able to sell. So the process of getting to a show is crazy. I mean, the amount, for those of you who worked with me, you saw we had 45 people on staff at the show. It's completely crazy. And so you have to plan everything going into it, and it has to come out of your head, unless you are lucky and are a billionaire and you can have someone just kind of bring a bunch of people in. Otherwise, it's got to come out of your head. You got to figure out the not only just the lineup, but how it circulates. How does the girl go from, how many changes does it take? Thank God I've been in industry long enough to know it takes 15 changes to get on a different, you have to know how big the runway is. So my runway was 80 feet. Guess what? In 80 feet, that it's about 1.5 minutes for her to get full cycle. So guess what? Every 10 minutes, someone else has to be out, which is 20-minute show. They get 2 changes in 20 minutes. So you have to know that, and know that what can you get in that change. And if you have a complicated change, guess what? That girl can only wear one look. So you got to push her to the end and know that she's only going to get that one look because of the complicated change. So in your brain, you're a designer, mathematician, photographer, creative director. You got to design some shoes and handbags because the show has shoes and handbags.
That's right.
Handbags, you don't necessarily need them, but you do need shoes. And you got to have hair and makeup. So it's a lot. I tell people, that's why I say at the beginning, even myself, after having been in the industry when I launched 20 years, I still said, I'm doing a capsule and I'm going to video it and I'm going to create something that tells a story at the beginning, because I wasn't ready yet to bite off what I knew a show is. A show is like putting a graph down and taking it's like doing a Broadway show, coming from casting all the way down, trying to figure out, what you need, the components that you need. And remember, models, during Fashion Week, I mean, I'm at a place now where the models want to work for me. So yes, I get priority, but at the beginning, you won't. So you're going to get some scary models that walk through that door and you're going to be like, oh my God, I cannot put this girl on the runway. But I am not priority, because remember, there's 2 shows every hour. Once again, thank God now no one goes against me. So I have my hour, but at the beginning, when you start, there's going to be 3 other people against you. So you're going to want a model and 4 other designers are going to want her. And guess what? The one with the most power is getting her. That's just the reality of life. Until you build up a need for the model, the booker, everyone to want that girl in your show. Remember, girls are working hard to build their own reputation too. They want to be in the best shows. They don't want to be in a show if they're scared of the clothing. That's another thing that people don't understand. Models can say they don't want to do your show. If they don't think they look great in the clothing, they can walk out. I've heard many of people who've had to call me and ask me if I have a model that can run over and do their show, because they had girls who after their fittings were like, I'm not walking that show, because they know that the picture lives forever and they don't want that picture up.
And they're their own brand as well.
They're their brands, especially now. The first thing you look at is Instagram for a model. You got to make sure they have at least 10,000 followers, and that they're engaged and they're whatever, because when they post pictures and you're posting back and forth, you do want your brand to elevate. You want the conversation to continue. So all of this is what we do on our own lives when you're an influencer or whatever, but imagine it times 10 if you're a brand. So you have to make sure that your brand, everything around your brand is taken care of. And so with that story, I encourage you, once again, I say photography, learn how the lights work. Go take a 1-day theater tech class. I don't care where it is, just know the process. So when you're there, you're not, the other thing is you're going to have a budget. and they will throw you all kinds of, oh, it's $500 to change one light. You know what? A light's $50. But if you don't know that, you're going to get screwed. So you have to know these things. So I would say learn this process. Learn all the things you think you're going to need so that you can be self-reliant and you can create the story you want without having to bring in other people. The closer you can get to yourself, the better the story is what I think.
Yeah.
The more people involved, the more diluted the story is. And if you have 50 people involved, every season, it's gonna be like hogwash, hardworks, like you're, so.
Yeah, unless you could take out the wand, but so
exactly.
You're never basically, you never have downtime because so many people ask how long, how many months to prepare. You're forever preparing and you're forever working, but you are joyous in your work. Like you said, you could enjoy a glass of wine and keep working, basically. Because
I found a way after all these years to try to find joy because I'm not doing anything else. I've decided this is what I'm doing. So I'm not going anywhere else. So I've got to find joy within it. But like the process, as soon as the show was over, I was in a panic because I had only shipped 40% of my collection and the stores will not allow late shipments. Guess what? Shipping's ending March 15th. So guess what I've been doing all day? We literally have had full staff, everyone cutting, trying to get things to sewing, trying to get things to seamstresses. It's like as soon as the show ended, I was in a panic attack. And I was like, oh my God, I have 3 weeks to ship, 1,000 units. And it is just like, your mind just completely goes crazy. And you're like, oh my God, I'm doing it. But and the other part of it is like my sales team. So I don't have an in-house sales anymore. I have, which is the future is here. I keep saying the future is here because I think we have to remember that in our brains. Don't go by the old idea that you bring someone in to do your sales, you bring someone in to do your marketing grading, you do bring someone in to do your patterns. Everyone can be freelance. You can bring in what you can afford. Work on the level that you can afford. Don't drive yourself into debt or you won't be here. Work on the level that you can afford and do what you can afford to do. And create 5 pieces if you can only create 5 pieces. And then showcase those 5 pieces so you can get to 10, and again get to 20, and then get to 30. Build your story the way you should. But what I was talking about before was so I have a sales team. The sales team left today actually for Paris. So they actually packed up. So I don't show in a showroom. I show in a separate space called the co-laboratory with 2 sales teams. So I have a salesperson for the US and I have one that does international. So the US just finished sales. I went yesterday for Saks and then they close up sales and then the collection goes to Paris. And then I meet them in Paris next week. But I'm supposed to be out Friday, but guess what? I'm a week late on shipping. So guess who's sitting here making sure the stuff gets shipped? Because the irony of it is that if it's not right, no one's being blamed but you. You're the designer. If you walk out of that door and you go to Paris and your collection is not done and it gets to the store and it looks like crap, and all they remember is that it looks like crap. They don't remember that you had a sales team that did it. They don't remember that there was a production person that did it. So what I'm telling you is that it's not just the show. While I'm doing the show, I'm shipping. Spring ships January 15th to March 15th. Guess what time that is? That's in the height of show and sales. Sales ends this week and next week is my deadline for shipping. It's completely crazy. So when everyone talks about what the industry, how crazy it is, that's why people are mad and out of their minds most of the time is that, you have to be careful what you wish for and build the story so that you can handle it. Because if, you say you want to sell all these stores, you sell all these stores, and if you can't deliver within 1 week, you'll be gone. They will not pick you up again. The number one thing that you have to remember is that they're buying you and they gave you money. If you don't ship them, they lost that money. They're planning on making money off that money they spent on you. They will not come back. Right. Zero. They will not come back. So many designers die that way. So all this goes back to take your time, build 15 pieces if you think you can deliver 15 pieces and make them well. Make them really well and make sure the story is strong and start and build slowly, 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 slowly.
And what Sala asks, do you think there's an age limit on starting out in the fashion industry?
No. I mean, hello, I'm 50 now and I just launched my new collection. So who knew? And I think it's a funny thing. So this will make you laugh. So, it's like I started at 20, of course, at 25. but out of school. But then what's so funny, so I'm not nominated for Rising Star for Fashion Group this year. And I had to do, it's a big, I'm very proud of it, the awards in May. And anyway, so it's funny because I had to do an interview with all of the press on a Zoom in November. So it's like Fern Malice, who's a friend of mine, and Constance White from the New York Times, and all these people who, I thank God, it's funny because all of them had been at my show the month before, which I was laughing. So we did a Zoom call, but I have to do a presentation. And Fern, at the end of the presentation, said that, well, your collection's beautiful. She said, but why now? Why are you Rising Star after you've been in the industry this long? And I looked at her and I said, because now I'm Frederick, and this collection is Frederick Anderson. It's really me. And so therefore, if you're looking at an idea of the newness of what I'm about right now, yes, I think that that's valid. And I said, and that's what the award is about. So to answer your question, I'm living proof. Who cares? Launch when you launch. Be ready to launch. If it takes you 10 years to be ready and you don't launch till you're 80, launch when you're 80 with a great collection, and do the best you can do. Don't launch before you're ready, because especially if you get press and it looks bad, it's hard to get a second chance. And there's so many people who are destroyed because they launch before they're ready and before they have a clear vision of what they have to say, and they come out with this kind of crazy crap, and you kind of look at it and you're like, isn't that sad? Because of underneath you can see maybe there's a spark of something, and you're like, I wish they would have learned to sew, or don't sew it themselves and understand that they have to work with someone. And, or find a way to tell your story the correct way, but wait and do it step by step.
Amazing. Amazing advice. I think that every single word that you've said relates back to not only what everybody is studying, but so relevant for right now. I know we're all going to be voting for you for Rising Star. We have 5 minutes, so I want to make sure we're conscious of your time. And
I'm there. Just keep going. I'm good.
Okay. So, a lot of them were asking about the planning and what goes into it. So I don't want to be redundant with so many questions, with so many answers that you already gave on that. But okay, at first, Adnan asked, what is the first image of a brand that comes to mind that compels women to buy that product? So what do you think makes you so compelling that people want to buy into your brand? And I think you alluded a lot to it during this conversation, but what makes
people can read it? It's the same reason that you pick up and look at an Instagram and you fall in love with some strange story that someone's writing, because you believe the story. And I think that you look at the product and you see the story and they match. And the story is cohesive and it's strong, and you come back and visit it 6 months later and it's the same story. It hasn't changed. They haven't decided now they're all about hula skirts and Bermuda, and they've gone on a new tangent. They continue the story. And what engages people is when they get into your story, they want to know more. And then when you keep giving them more, they get excited and they become hooked. I mean, it's the Chanel story. Come on, Chanel, Hermes. Hermes tells us every single season the exact same thing about quality, taste, heritage, all the same buzzwords. They just do it differently. And it's the same exact thing for Chanel. We hear it over and over again. The great masters of branding have always done this. We as beginners in the brand world have to take from them and go, oh, what are they doing that makes it work? Well, there are specifics. It's like Chanel. When you say Chanel, what do you think of Chanel? You think of the tweed jackets. You think of the little chains on the bags. You think of all these things, these signatures that if you look at their collection right now, every other piece has those signatures in it, because they know that's their story and that's their vocabulary. And I always call it vocabulary, the vocabulary in which they speak in. So people learn your vocabulary and they catch on to the way that you speak through your product. And then they want to see it every time. And you can expand and grow into different styles or whatever, but the vocabulary, the story has to stay the same. If you started off talking about, organic pieces and organic things, you can't all of a sudden do a space age collection and do all metals or something. People are going to be like, okay, they're turning, you've been just dropped, you've been deleted, you lost your mind, you lost all of your clients, you lost everything about. So the first image to drive someone, I don't know, I'm in love with Alexander McQueen, always was. What was the first image was actually Shalom in the dress turning on the turntable. Have all of you seen that video? The most beautiful video ever done. If you haven't seen it, you need to see McQueen's show where he talks about the color and the building of color on a garment. And he has these armatron, like, you know, it is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. I literally watched the documentary, and it ends the documentary, and I cried again every time I see it. It is so beautiful. But that is the experience of making clothing. It's like he wanted to talk about building the print on the girl while she was there. So she becomes part of the story. She's standing there, and the fabric is developed on her body in front of the audience. Breathtaking. And that, to me, was the first time I said, okay, McQueen is the god, the genius. And I think that, like, we all have those moments. And so to me, you know, it's the same as you see someone and you see, like, you know, they'll say something or do something that inspires you, and then you're hooked. I mean, it's not always the clothing. That's the irony of everything. You know, a Tom Ford, I mean, I don't know any specific piece Tom Ford does, but I buy into his branding. I mean, I wear his fragrances. I mean, I know all the women I know wear his makeup, and, you know, I mean, you know, I buy into that story. I couldn't tell you what he's known for. But he built a strong story based on the sexiness and the sensuality and the use of textures in his ad campaign. So, you know, however it happens for you, it just has to be strong and specific.
Excellent. So Dipti wanted to know, at what point do you think you're ready to launch? At what point do you say, okay, I'm ready. I have the 16 pieces. Now is the time. What pushes you over the edge and says, now I'm ready to launch?
When you think you're going to die if you don't.
Okay.
I don't know that there is another answer. It's like, when you're ready to do it, you're ready to do it. And if you're not ready to do it, don't do it. And because, you got to be ready for the good and ready for the bad. You could spend your whole life waiting to do it, and then you launch and you realize, oh my God, I didn't have a clear vision. So I think that when you feel that that's why I said start small. Start in something that is manageable, and you can look at it and see what your vision is, because you may look at it and go, oh my God, that isn't what I was thinking. And then you have a second to pull back, because you haven't done something big. You can pull back and fine tune and kind of have other conversations with yourself to build upon that story to get it right. I don't think there's a launch point. I don't think you should ever be desperate to launch. I think you should launch when you're ready and when you feel that you have a story. If you don't have a story and you're just making shit, don't launch. There's a lot of people making shit. And making shit, especially right now, there's so much out there. Making stuff, you can turn on your Instagram, and we all do it, and there's 500 like sweatshirts and this. I have a friend who thinks she's a super designer, and she makes hats, and she's always telling me, like, you're my competition. I'm like, okay.
If you say so.
I don't, who am I to say? I mean, I don't know. Maybe one day I want to do like biker. I don't know what's going to happen. I look at it and I was just like, she told me I'm her competition too. She told a friend of mine that and of course I was laughing hysterically because it was just so ridiculous. But by the same token, in her life and in her mind, fabulous. Thank God, good for her. That is part of the story within us when we think it's time to launch. And you know what? She's that strong and adamant. Maybe she will develop a brand, when it's that specific, so.
Okay, 2 more questions, then we're gonna cut it. Can you talk more about PR, advertising, what advertising plays into your brand and the value it brings?
Interesting. Partnerships.
I think you're talking about the value of social.
Yeah, I think it's all social, and I think it's like, I do a lot of promotions on social. Whenever I do a video or something, I promote the hell out of it, and as far as ads, I'm not sure that many people. I would be interested in how many people, even on this Zoom, on this webinar, how many of you actually look through a magazine? That would be the interesting question. Like, how many think about yourself, because we can't take a real poll, but like who actually open up and look at a magazine. And then you ask yourself, what marketing do you need to do? Because once again, be smart. think about what's actually happening. It's not about like the things that we're told are going to happen. We are already in the future. So how are we communicating now? When you communicate with your friends every day and you're having these conversations through all of these Instagram and whatever, imagine how your collection can live in that same space. That's how I think every day. I think all the time about like, you know, that's why I'm very big into parties and meeting people and like, you know, the integration. I travel a lot because I want to put my hands in someone's hand and shake their hand and have a face-to-face, because then I think what happens once they meet you and they put it together with what they've seen, you become a strong, you become a stronger idea, you know. But like, you know, the whole magazine world is imploded. It's not even, it's so little, there's so little of it out there that I'm not sure how relevant it is in brand building. I think that once you're a big brand, of course, you maybe want to advertise as much as possible when you have the excess income to do it. But like, we're not about that right now. I mean, that's not the future, and you're in the future. You guys are creating the future. So what you're doing now is the future. It's not me. I'm existing and moving forward, but you guys are going to create what the next level is. So I would look and say, what are the interesting things that I'm doing right now with my friends on social media and the way that we're communicating, and how can I do that with my clothing? If I were starting right now at 20, that's what I would be. I would be obsessed with only imagery, and I would be obsessed with writing stories through my images. I would go to every photography class. I would have 15 different cameras. I'm just being totally serious for myself. And I would that would be my headspace right now. I would be doing TikTok. I'd be doing everything, talking about my brand. But also, don't ever forget, it's not just the brand, it's how you exist in the brand. How are you creating this clothing? I built a story already because I've been in the industry a long time. So yes, I didn't have to do as much legwork showing me making clothing and stuff, because everyone knows I know how to make clothing. So I didn't have to write that story. I can build from there up. But all of you are going to have to write that story, that you can make clothing. What is the process? What is your process? Do you actually sketch? Show that process. Are you not a sketcher? Are you an illustrator in the sense of, you know, storyboards and whatever? I'm not a storyboard person. I'm more of a pen to paper sketching and laying it out. You know, that's my process. Not everyone's. Some people like to put images from all over the world and try to put a pinpoint on where they're headed. I mean, whatever your process is, that could be interesting for your consumer. And also, it's interesting for you to know your process. Don't just change every season and do something else. Find a process that works for you and build upon it. Because if that's the key, and you start becoming more successful as you build upon that process, and your process becomes stronger, and your story becomes stronger because the process is stronger. If your process is that you do images first and then later you make clothing, do that every season and make yourself do it and religiously follow those processes to build upon that, to build strength. And you'll be surprised that all of a sudden you'll be like, oh my God, there's a consistency because I've gone through the same process every time. It builds consistency because all of a sudden it's like, A, I have to do this, B, I have to do this, C, I do this, and you'll see the outcome. But you have to discipline yourself. You can't just get frustrated and say, because this didn't work, that like all of a sudden, oh, the whole process isn't working. It may be a fall down because of maybe you didn't have the right inspiration from the beginning, but build a process and follow through the process. Find something that works for you, but work in your own way. Don't look around you. Don't look to the past. Don't look to whatever. I mean, the past is great to get information of how like A to Z to make a garment. But when you're talking about, because this specific question was marketing and PR, when you're talking about marketing and PR, there is no Bible. Everything is new right now. There is no Bible right now. That Bible is gone, and now we're building a new one because everything changed when the internet went crazy and when remember, social media is less than 10 years old. This is all happening in our time. So we've got to take this and move it, because if you don't move it and you're not part of it, 5 years from now, you're going to be a dinosaur. I have friends now who don't know anything about it, and I'm always shocked. I'm like, it's not an age thing. It's just that you're not paying attention and you're not living in the present, because it is the way we're talking now. It's not going away. It will change and it will morph, but it's not going away. So, that is the new dialogue. That's part of the clothing dialogue.
It's amazing, right? We were talking about it in a class that, dematerialization, we have everything here now. Everything is here. We used to have a camera and a radio and a fax machine and a scanner, and it's our phone. And you're talking about ads, but what was the last ad that made you buy? It's probably
I don't look at ads.
Right?
I hate ads. So I'm the worst when it comes to ads. But I love videos and content that makes me think. I like images that like draw me in. I love music. Originally, before I was a designer, I was on Broadway. I don't know if anyone knows that, but like,
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So my original degree was in fine arts. So I came to New York as a singer dancer, and I was in Cats and Crazy for You. I was in some shows in Broadway in the 90s. And while I was on Broadway with Crazy for You, I went back to FIT. And so that was my process. So for me, little did I know 20 years later that I would use all of my knowledge that I learned about theater. I mean, I can do a show with my eyes closed and whatever. I can pull a team together and da-da-da. Little did I know that when I went and took 2 years of photography at Parsons, that I would now nonstop do images. I love images. I work with all these photographers and they all laugh at me. They're like, you don't actually need us. I say, well, someone's got to take the photo, but I do everything else. I'm like, I see it from this angle. This is the girl and she's doing this. And then they basically help me get there because you can't do everything yourself. But like, I have a clear vision of where I want to get. And so never forget, everything in your life leads to the next thing. So don't think you're throwing anything away. Get as much information as you can. I mean, everything you get is going to be useful in the end result when you have to do something. Like, you can't do a show without understanding all the parameters. We go back to that because that is the way that we present ourselves in fashion. And you got to know the parameters that exist around it. And you have to be fluent in those parameters or you will not be successful. It's just part of the story. You got to be able to present, especially now more than ever, images. You got to know how to present your collection. Otherwise, you're dead in the water. You can't just have a pretty dress. Those days are so far gone. There are a lot of people who make pretty dresses and they're dinosaurs and they're gone,
Thank you so much, Frederick. We videoed this and I just feel like this was amazing and so relevant, so now, so crucial for these young designers or even people that are rebranding in the industry, and even the educators that are here needed to hear. And we appreciate your time. We are super grateful. And we're so happy that we could connect you with any sort of internships or anybody you might need. We want to be there for you.
Absolutely. Oh my God, your interns were so great at the show. Fantastic. I love interns. And I try to bring people in because I do think it's important. I mean, I had a mentor, which was Jeffrey Bean. Many of these students will never know who Jeffrey Bean was, but he was like a prolific, amazing designer in the late 90s. When I came in, he's from the 80s to the 90s, but when I was getting into fashion in the late 90s, 2000, he was kind of moving on to being just a label and selling his fragrances and stuff. But he would take my partner and I, and we would go to lunch. And he would sit, even though he was like kind of bitter and bitchy, it was kind of amazing though. He would just partake all of this information. And he would say things to me that were like kind of amazing. Like, he used to talk about circus clothing. And he would say, there is clothing that belongs in a circus, and not because it's not a fantasy, but because you didn't solve the one problem, is how do you put it on the body? And I would always, and it stuck with me all of these years. So as much fantasy as you want to do, challenge yourself to make a woman be able to zip it and put it on her body.
Yeah.
It is the challenge. He said, otherwise it needs to be in a circus because it is like a marvel if she could ever wear it. He said, it's not real clothing, it's something else. And I remember that. Also, another thing he always says, never forget the back of the garment. If you ever look at every dress that I do little curves in the back, I do darts in the back, I do little pieces. He said, because the sexiest thing on those women is when they walk away. And
party in the front, party in the back. Yes.
Exactly. I believe it all the time. You would love me in my Saks thing, in my Saks meeting. They always laugh at me because I'm like, I said, okay, wait till she turns around. They're like, Frederick, you're always talking about the ass. I said, I don't know. Maybe it's because I'm a Black man. I don't get it. Like, I want to see the whole body. I think that's what's sexy. Is you can't forget, it's not just about, in fact, I'm not big on big cleavages out all the time. Usually I'll do things more about this area than I'll do like push up. I don't understand that. I think that's dating. I think that's an older woman. Like, I think young girls are in another place. The girls that I think are sexy are not necessarily trying to push them up. They're trying to look natural, and then you see through. So I think that, you know, all these symbols and signals that we put out when we're making clothing attract our clients. So remember them. And when you see women, remember because you have to judge and think of women when you walk around, or men, if you're doing men's clothing, look at them and think of what they're saying to you. My statement, I said, and this is the last thing I'll talk about, the statement, the reason I have on my Instagram and everywhere I always put, style is your conversation with the world, is because it literally is the first thing that everyone sees, and they make a decision about you, like it or not, when you walk through a door. And it is the one thing, the power of clothing is that one thing. People make a decision before you open your mouth. And then if you open your mouth and you surprise them, voila. If you open your mouth and you they're like, oh, I thought you were going to be fantastic because you walked in with this fabulous outfit. That's the dress for success idea. But think about that. So style is a big conversation for us. So let's always remember that in our stories that we write, because women are looking for styles. Not everyone has great style. And our job is to help them get there when they don't have great style. Help them come up with new ways of putting things together. We're not reinventing the egg. We're just kind of dressing it and making it more beautiful and telling stories and helping women feel better about themselves is how I always think of things, So anyway, that's it.
Thank you so much, Frederick. Everybody, the outpouring of love is coming through. Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. And we will have you forevermore on our website so that people could come and hear your kernels of wisdom. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Style is your conversation with the world. Frederick Anderson. Thank you, guys.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.